You know when you see anything by full moon, you're in for a treat. Well, maybe not a treat, but an hour-long torture session. Hey, full moon movies aren't very long, but they are bad. Movies like Creepazoids and The Killer Eye are made very campy and cheap. Lurking Fear has the same look and feel as those other movies, but there is something different about it. Something that turns the suck factor way down. What is it? Well, let's watch. First off, maybe the reason this movie isn't a steaming pile of poo, and just a regular pile of poo, is that it's inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. So, that's something. First, we meet Catherine and her sister. Where they live, they got some monsters dwelling in the basement. But that's okay, the rent's cheap. One of them gets a hold of the sister's baby and starts to pull it in. Then, the mother stops it and shoots the creature.
Take her! Oh my God.
But it's not over yet, and she's pulled in through the tiny hole the creature lives in. Now we meet John Martins, an ex-con who's just getting released from prison. But he's the good guy of the story, so of course he was wrongfully imprisoned. Having nowhere else to go, he heads to a funeral where one of his father's friends works. Here he learns of a map that was left for him that apparently marks the spot in a graveyard where a stiff is buried that was stuffed full of cash. Kinda weird, but this is a little gift from his criminal father who robbed a casino. And then he had this mortician bury it for John. So when he got out of prison, he would have some money. Got all that? Okay, good. Moving on. Some other criminals pay the mortician a visit, led by Bennett. He's the owner of the casino John's dad robbed, and he wants his money back. He knows it's been buried in the cemetery, he just needs to know which one. After a little fight, the mortician tells him everything he wants to know. Then they kill him. Next, the bad guys follow our hero, John. At the cemetery that they're all heading to, there's a church, and inside is a bunch of survivors. Survivors of what? Well, yeah, the creatures we saw in the beginning. From the look of things, the humans aren't winning this fight. But they hope tonight will change all that. Led by Catherine, the girl in the beginning, they plant TNT on all the tombstones and get ready for a storm to come in. That seems to be the only time the monsters can come to the surface for some reason. It has to be dark and raining.
This is going to be quite a party.
Inside the church, the pastor seems to know a lot about the Martins family. Apparently, John's father escaped to live in the outside world, but then he died in prison. That's all fine and good, but what is this thing that he's talking to? This must be the monster. Bravo, full moon. This thing looks great. Finally, John shows up at the graveyard and Catherine greets him with a gun, wanting to know why he came here. John, not knowing about the monsters, only looking to dig up the body and get rich. They take him in and prepare for their big fight with the creatures. The rain started and the TNT is set, but just then, the trio of bad guys show up and take over. Bennett says that he's only here for the money, then they'll be on their separate ways.
I'm just here for the money.
But they don't know what they just walked into. Soon after that, they hear noises from the well, and everyone warns Bennett not to open it or they'll all be dead. It's not looking good for Caitlin, but then John interrupts and says that he'll take him to where the money's buried. But in reality, he doesn't really know. His best guess is that it's stuffed inside his grandmother's grave. So that's where they start digging. Man, if she's 6 feet under, it's gonna take them 3 days to dig her up at this rate. Well, in the next scene, the hole's dug and they open up the casket to see nothing. Well, no money. There's still John's grandma in there, but that's besides the point. That's not what they were hoping for. Just then, John is pulled under by the monsters. He's able to beat it off, but now he's trapped down here in a labyrinth of catacombs. A little later, inside the church, the others hear something under the floorboards and open fire. Much to their surprise, it's just John who found an exit. Now that everyone knows that there are monsters living underground, the survivors tell them that these things feed on humans, leaving only the bones. Bennett doesn't really care about all this. Still, he only wants his money. So the pastor takes him to the burial records to see if they can figure it all out. It turns out that the money is stuffed inside the cop who set up Martins and threw him into jail. So they at least know who to dig up now. Meanwhile, John and one of the henchmen fight a bit until one of the creatures pulls the bad guy through some glass. And that's the end of him. The bad guys fight the good guys fight the bad guys. It all goes on for a little bit too long. Meanwhile, Catherine escapes and finds a tanker truck that I'm sure will come in handy later on. Back inside the church, the father sneaks away and comes face to face with one of the monsters. He actually says that he prayed for it to come here. He wants to sacrifice himself so that the others can live. A noble thing to do, but these creatures aren't really honorable. So he kills the father and moves on to taking the rest of them out. Back to the main group, where there's more fighting, more digging, and really nothing too important. Eventually, Catherine gets pulled under, and already down there is John, who wakes up next to a bunch of corpses, which honestly look pretty creepy. So it ends up that everyone's down here now, and the monsters want this pregnant girl's baby to feed to their own children, which is pretty nasty.
Don't let them do it.
Bennett knows something that not even John knows. While talking to the father earlier on, Bennett learned that John has a birthmark on his shoulder that all the Martins family have. And it turns out that all of these creatures have the same birthmark. That's right, it's a big Martins family reunion. Also down there is a corpse filled with money. So Bennett starts stuffing his pockets while the others focus on an escape. John lights an arm on fire and they make it to the surface. The same can't be said about greedy Bennett, however. The survivors start pumping gas down into the tunnels, and then they light it up, killing all the creatures inside. And that was The Lurking Fear. In the end, the money in the corpse was burned up, and John is left wondering what he truly is, a man or a monster. I will say that this movie had some great explosions, and the monsters look super creepy. Although, I wonder how they blink. And were they human looking at one time like John? It leaves a lot of questions to be answered. I'm kind of reminded of the movie Bleeders here, which had a similar plotline of things living under the ground. But I would have to say Bleeders is a much better movie. Don't get me wrong, for a full moon movie this is fantastic, but it's still hard for me to recommend. The music is pretty bad, the acting, despite hiring actual actors, still left something to be desired, and the writing is confusing at times. I'm still not sure if they actually says Martin's first name at all. I just saw it was John in the credits. But the creepy monsters was a nice surprise, and them being related to John was a good twist at the end. At a short 78 minutes, it's okay if you're a big Lovecraftian horror fan. I give The Lurking Fear 2 bug-eyed monsters out of 4. Don't think that I was going to go this entire review without bringing up my favorite character, the Doctor, played by Jeffrey Combs, who's more famous for The Frighteners and Reanimator. Here he plays the Doctor, and he doesn't really do that much. I think he's just there for the pregnant lady, but he is really funny. The fact that he's been stuck in this church for God knows how long, whenever John has him light a Molotov cocktail, he just kind of makes this face. It's so nonchalant. He's just like, here you go, and he throws it, and the Doctor's just so not fazed by these creatures anymore. It's really funny.